Central Florida at Houston. This is Friday night ESPN action. Marco, what should bettors be looking at?
A lot of scoring in this game. Both teams can score, but only one team can play defense, and that team is Central Florida, and I think that's the difference in this ball game.
Okay, so where do you have that opinion? Some opinions come from your eyes. You watch the games. Mm-hmm. Some opinion comes from stats. I'm guessing you haven't watched a lot of Central Florida games, so give me some stats on this.
Well, going to the teams can score, Central Florida, 42, 35, 41, and 49 points in their last 4 games. Houston also, in their last 2 games, 45 and 56 points, but they were against SMU and Memphis, 2 teams that Memphis is just an absolutely horrible team. SMU is an offensive team that plays no defense. Central Florida owns the better defense. They did give up 35 points last week to East Carolina. That game got into a shootout early, but before that, they held 5 teams this year to 17 points or less. Central Florida.
Okay, now that makes some sense to me. Here's a concern I might have: is the game opened up at 2, and it's now 3.5. Now, we all know the key number in football is 3, with 7 being...
You actually have that backwards.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it opened at 3.5 and is now 2.
Okay, so that brings up another question. That's really an interesting point, because whenever you have an early move, it means one of 2 things. If it's towards your side, you're now getting a worse number, and then the question becomes, how bad can the lines makers be? And if the line was it couldn't be that far off to start with. Like, we've had times where the game opens up at 4, all of a sudden it goes to 6.5, and the touts are saying, not pregame touts hopefully, lay to 6.5, and I'm like, well, really, my question is, how bad could the lines maker have been? Because if you're laying 6.5, you think the line should at least be 8 and 8.5, 8 or 8.5. So now all of a sudden the lines maker opened it at 4, but it should have been 8.5. Were they that far off? So on one hand is, if the line goes with you, you're getting the worst of it. If the line goes against you, you're betting against the wise guys. So in this case, it would seem your Central Florida opinion's betting against the wise guys. Does that cause you pause as a handicapper?
Anytime you see an early line move, yes, it's going to cause you pause. You're going to dig a little deeper and see if there's something that you're missing. And I think that what the wise guys possibly are looking here, and I've got a different view, and I'll explain it to you. This Houston team's coming off playing 3 in a row on the road. That's normally, they don't do it hardly at all in the NFL anymore. There is actually one team this week, we'll talk about them later in the video, that played 3, and they had it here in college. So I think they're looking and saying, okay, Houston's been on the road, for so long. They're back at home. It's a Friday night game. Crowd's going to be in it, blah, blah, blah. And I think they want the home dog.
So what you're saying is, you see where because really wise guys are handicappers. Mm-hmm. The guys putting the bets in may or may not handicap the game, but all betting is saying, this is what the number should be in my opinion. Here's what the number is. If there's a variance, I'm going to bet it for value. You're saying that whoever's doing the sharp handicapping for the syndicates, for the outfits, they're seeing something that you think they're overvaluing.
There is, and what I'm looking at, I view it differently, because normally on these short week games, they have the week off before. A lot of times they schedule their bye before they'll play a Thursday or a Friday game. These teams both played last week. I think come the second half, fatigue is going to be a problem for this Houston team, because they've played 3 road games.
Now one last day. But if the road team doesn't have the bye coming in, then that's actually a bigger disadvantage, because as a road team, you're losing a day to travel. Now you're losing another day.
You lose a day to travel, and again, you'll probably say I read too much in. If you think back to the beginning of the tape when I said, other than last week,
we don't use tape anymore.
Well,
it's digital.
Digital. But
you used to do videos with the hand crank and stuff, right?
My first phone, I had a string to it, okay? But, the situation being, I said that they held all those teams to 17 or less, but last week they didn't. And I think that Central Florida didn't play as physical brand of football as they normally do last week. No, because you got that short week coming back up. I think you're going to see Central Florida put the lockdown on Houston, make their normal physical style, and I think that's going to have its wear and tear.
All right, but let's dig in, though. I love what we're talking about here. Is you're saying, I'm Marco D'Angelo. I'm wearing a jacket right now. I won 21 straight baseball games without laying
25 actually.
25 straight baseball games without laying over 120. I am 25-6 on my college football games of the year. I'm Marco, right? Some variation of that.
Yeah.
And I know why the Sharps are playing this, and I disagree. But fact is, because the Sharps did play it, I'm only laying 2 instead of laying 3.5, and I'm on the odds maker side. And really, if you think about it, going through 3, laying 2 when, let's just say the line should be 3.5. Let's just say that the odds makers were right. That's all the value you need. You're going to hit over 52.4, which is all you need to be profitable, just laying 2 instead of 3.5.
Right.
So it's really you and the odds makers against the Sharps in this case. Which that's the beauty of it, is if you have a strong enough opinion as a handicapper to buck the Sharps, you can actually come away with the best of the number every time you go against them.
You can. I mean, you have to be smart with it. And like I said, that's what made me dig further into this game and look at the situations, is because I wanted to understand that move and make sense of it. And, you know, the 3-game thing stuck out to me, you know.
All right, one last thing. This is kind of a trend this week. We're going to talk about road teams that do really well on the road in college football. Now, one thing I've always believed is the very best college football teams, the Ohio States, the Floridas, the programs that run almost at a professional level, they usually travel very well. And we're going to be doing the Alabama game, where we're going to talk about a road trend that they have, and Ohio State has one too. Usually the lesser teams, people don't realize these operations are not professional. Central Florida is kind of, let's just say it's very different than Alabama. Usually those teams have a ton more trouble on the road, and their ATS records show it. Central Florida's won 10 of 11 ATS on the road. Now, why is that? Well, 10 of 11 could be a fluke, because that's a low enough sample size that it's not necessarily going to be fully statistically significant. But it could be, and I don't have any inside information on this, they have a great director of football operations that just knows how to travel. They got a head coach that knows how to travel. But to some degree, you got to think this team can travel for whatever reason, which I think is another lean towards Central Florida.
Good point.
All right, anything to close before you give your official projection?
I have Central Florida 34-30. It is going to be a high-scoring game with the Friday night. We're going to take it. Not a big margin, but I think we've got that value.
2.5, that's the value right there.
It.
All right, good stuff. Now it's your turn to continue the conversation in the comments section with Marco and me. And next up, so if you're listening on podcast, this is going to be the last one, so you go to the next podcast for all of the weekend stuff. And if you're on video, just go to the next video, and we're going to be breaking down the biggest weekend football games.